My husband died 5 years ago, but yesterday the janitor asked me, Mrs. Collins, who's the man that visits you every Tuesday? I installed a camera. What I saw made me fall to my knees. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Deanna Collins, and I'm 63 years old. For the past 5 years, I've lived alone in the same house where Jared and I spent 38 years of marriage. Some mornings I wake up and still expect to smell his coffee brewing in the kitchen or hear him humming that old Frank Sinatra song he loved so much. But the house stays silent, and I make my own coffee now. I thought I had grown comfortable with my solitude. I had my routines, my small garden, my weekly trips to the grocery store. Tuesday mornings I visit Jared's grave. Thursday afternoons I volunteer at the library. And Sundays I call my daughter Rachel, though our conversations never last more than 10 minutes. She's always busy with her own family, her own life. I understand. I don't expect more. But yesterday, everything changed with a single question. I was coming back from my morning walk when Fred, our building's janitor, approached me near the mailboxes. Fred has worked here for over 15 years. He's a quiet man in his 70s with kind eyes and calloused hands that speak of a lifetime of honest work. We've exchanged pleasantries countless times, but he's never been one for long conversations. "Morning, Mrs. Collins," he said, tipping his worn baseball cap as he always did. "Good morning, Fred," I replied, fumbling with my keys. My arthritis had been acting up, and the simple task of unlocking my mailbox seemed more difficult than usual. Fred hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. I could sense he wanted to say something more, but wasn't sure how to begin. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Collins, can I ask you something?" I turned to face him fully, noting the uncertain expression on his weathered face. "Of course, Fred. What is it?" He glanced around the empty lobby as if making sure we were alone. "It's about the man who visits you every Tuesday." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, and for a moment I couldn't breathe properly. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Fred's brow furrowed with concern. "The man who comes to see you on Tuesdays. Tall fellow, maybe in his 50s. I've seen him going up to your floor several times, always around 2 in the afternoon." I stared at Fred, trying to process what he was telling me. "Fred, I think there's been some mistake. No one visits me on Tuesdays. No one visits me at all, really." But even as I said the words, doubt began creeping into my mind like cold water seeping through cracks in a foundation. Fred wasn't the type to make things up or confuse details. He was methodical, observant. It came with the job. "Are you sure it's my apartment?" I asked, though I already knew what his answer would be. Fred nodded slowly. "Apartment 4B. That's yours, right? I've seen him use a key to get in." "A key?" The words echoed in my head as I rode the elevator to the 4th floor. Someone had a key to my apartment. Someone was coming into my home while I was... Where was I on Tuesday afternoons? I unlocked my door with trembling hands and stepped inside. Everything looked exactly as I had left it that morning. My coffee cup sat in the sink. The newspaper lay folded on the kitchen table where I'd left it after reading the obituaries, a habit I'd developed since Jared's death. The throw pillow on my armchair was positioned just as I liked it, slightly askew against the left armrest. But now I found myself scrutinizing every detail, searching for signs that someone else had been here. Had that magazine on the coffee table been open to that page when I left? Was the bathroom door usually left ajar like that? I spent the rest of the morning walking through my apartment like a detective at a crime scene, looking for evidence of an intruder. But everything seemed normal, undisturbed. If someone had been here, they'd been careful to leave no trace. That afternoon, I found myself sitting by my living room window, watching the street below. Tuesday afternoon came and went, no visitors, no mysterious men with keys. Just me, alone in my apartment, beginning to wonder if Fred had been mistaken after all. But as evening approached, I made a decision that would change everything. I called the security company I'd seen advertised in the local newspaper and arranged for them to install cameras in my apartment. If someone was coming into my home without my knowledge, I needed proof. The installation was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend in a state of nervous anticipation, jumping at every sound in the hallway, checking and double-checking my locks. I even called Rachel, hoping she might have some explanation. "Mom, that's ridiculous," she said when I told her about Fred's claim. "Who would be visiting you, and with a key? Maybe the janitor is getting confused in his old age." Her dismissive tone stung more than I expected. "Fred's not that old, Rachel. And he's very sharp." "Mom, you haven't had visitors since Dad's funeral. Trust me, if someone was coming to see you regularly, I'd know about it." After I hung up, I realized Rachel was right about one thing. I hadn't had visitors in 5 years. My sister lived in Oregon. My few remaining friends had gradually drifted away after Jared's death, and Rachel only came by on major holidays. Who could possibly be visiting me? Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling. The security technician, a young man named Mike, arrived promptly at 9 o'clock. I watched nervously as he installed small cameras in my living room and kitchen, explaining how the system worked. "These will record continuously," he said, showing me how to access the footage on a small monitor. "Motion activated, so they'll pick up any movement in these areas. You can review the recordings anytime." After he left, I sat staring at the monitor, feeling foolish. What was I expecting to find? But Fred's words kept echoing in my mind. A man with a key coming every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Tuesday morning, I followed my usual routine. I made coffee, read the newspaper, tended to my small herb garden on the balcony. At noon, I decided to take a longer walk than usual, staying away from the apartment for several hours. If someone was coming, I didn't want to be there to see it. When I returned at 5 o'clock, my hands were shaking as I accessed the camera footage. I fast-forwarded to 2 o'clock, holding my breath, and there he was. A tall man, maybe in his early 50s, letting himself into my apartment with a key. He moved with familiarity through my living space, as if he'd been there many times before. But what disturbed me most wasn't his presence. It was how comfortable he seemed, how he knew exactly where everything was. He spent nearly an hour in my apartment, though the camera angles didn't show everything he did. When he left, he locked the door behind him carefully, quietly. I watched the footage 3 times, my heart pounding harder with each viewing. Fred had been right. Someone was coming into my home every Tuesday. Someone who had a key and knew my schedule well enough to avoid being seen. But who was he? And what did he want from a lonely 63-year-old widow? As I sat in my darkened living room that night, staring at the frozen image of the stranger on my monitor, I realized that my quiet, predictable life had just become something much more complicated and frightening. Sleep became a stranger to me after seeing that footage. I spent the rest of the week obsessing over every detail captured by those cameras, replaying the stranger's movements until I had them memorized. The way he paused at my kitchen counter, how he seemed to know exactly where I kept my spare reading glasses, the gentle way he touched the framed photo of Jared and me on our wedding day. It was that last detail that disturbed me most. This wasn't a burglar or some random intruder. This man knew me somehow, knew my life, my routines. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I should recognize him, and my failure to do so filled me with a growing sense of dread. Thursday morning, I decided to confront Fred again. I found him replacing burned-out bulbs in the hallway fixtures, his movements slow and methodical as always. "Fred," I called softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned and smiled. "Morning, Mrs. Collins. How are you feeling today?" "I need to ask you more about the man you've been seeing. The one who visits on Tuesdays." Fred set down his toolbox and gave me his full attention. "You believe me now?" I nodded, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. "I installed cameras. You were right. Someone has been coming into my apartment." Fred's expression grew serious. "Have you called the police?" "Not yet. I need to understand more first. How long have you been seeing him?" Fred scratched his graying beard, thinking. "Must be about 6 months now, maybe longer. At first, I thought maybe he was a relative or something. He always seemed like he belonged there, you know. Very respectful, quiet, never caused any trouble. 6 months. The number hit me like a punch to the stomach. Someone had been entering my home for half a year and I'd never noticed. What kind of person doesn't notice an intruder in their own space? Did you ever try to talk to him? I asked. Once, Fred admitted. About 2 months ago, I was fixing Mrs. Peterson's doorknob when he came up the stairs. I said hello, but he just nodded and kept walking. Seemed nervous when he saw me. I thanked Fred and returned to my apartment, my mind spinning with questions. 6 months of Tuesday visits. What had been happening during those times? What was this man doing in my home while I was out? That afternoon, I decided to conduct an experiment. Instead of leaving the apartment, I would pretend to go out but actually hide in my bedroom and wait. If he came, maybe I could finally get some answers. At 1:30 on Tuesday, I made a show of leaving, even saying goodbye to Fred loudly in the lobby. But instead of going outside, I took the emergency stairs back up and slipped into my apartment through the back service entrance that connected to the kitchen. I positioned myself in my bedroom where I could hear the front door but wouldn't be visible to the cameras. At exactly 2 o'clock, I heard the soft click of a key in the lock. My heart hammered against my ribs as I listened to footsteps moving through my living room. They were deliberate, familiar. This person knew my space well. I heard the refrigerator open and close, the soft sound of running water, movement in what sounded like my kitchen. For 45 minutes, I remained frozen in my bedroom, afraid to breathe too loudly. The sounds continued, careful domestic sounds, like someone was taking care of my home. When I finally heard the front door close, I waited another 10 minutes before emerging. What I found in my kitchen made my knees weak. The dishes I had left in the sink were clean and put away. My small herb garden had been watered. The expired milk I'd forgotten to throw away was gone, replaced with a fresh carton. On my counter sat a small bag of my favorite tea, Earl Grey with bergamot, the expensive kind I only bought as a special treat. But it was the note that made me sink into my kitchen chair, my hands trembling. Written in neat handwriting on a piece of my own stationery were the words, "Hope you're feeling better. The chamomile tea should help with your sleep. Take care of yourself." Someone was taking care of me. This wasn't a robbery or a violation. This was care. But from whom? And why couldn't I remember giving anyone permission to do this? I called Rachel that evening, my voice shaking as I told her about the note. "Mom, this is getting really concerning," she said, and I could hear the worry in her voice. "Maybe you should come stay with us for a while. This sounds like you might be having some memory issues." Memory issues. The phrase hit me like ice water. What do you mean? Well, think about it logically. Someone's been coming to your apartment for months, taking care of things, and you never noticed. Either someone's drugging you, which seems unlikely, or you're having some kind of memory problems. After I hung up, I sat in my living room staring at the note. Rachel's words echoed in my mind. Memory issues. Was I losing my mind? Was this mysterious caregiver actually someone I knew, someone I'd forgotten? I spent that night going through old photo albums, searching for a face that might match the figure in my camera footage. But the resolution wasn't clear enough to make out specific features, and nothing in my photos triggered any recognition. The next morning, I made a decision that frightened me but seemed necessary. I was going to stay awake and confront this person directly. No more hiding, no more wondering. I needed answers. But first, I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. I called my doctor and scheduled an appointment for a memory evaluation. "Mrs. Collins," Dr. Martinez said gently when I explained my concerns, "memory changes can be very subtle at first. Sometimes we don't notice gaps until something unusual happens to point them out." She ran several tests and asked me detailed questions about my daily routines. When we finished, she leaned back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. "Your cognitive function seems normal for your age," she said, "but I want you to start keeping a daily journal. Write down everything you do, everyone you see. It might help us identify if there are patterns you're not noticing." I left her office feeling both relieved and more confused than ever. If my memory was fine, then how had someone been caring for me for 6 months without my knowledge? That weekend, I found something that changed everything. While cleaning out Jared's old desk, something I'd been putting off for 5 years, I discovered a small key hidden in a secret compartment I'd never known existed. The key was attached to a piece of paper with an address I didn't recognize and a phone number. In Jared's handwriting, barely legible, were the words, "In case something happens to me, he deserves to know the truth." My hands shook as I stared at the note. Jared had hidden something from me, something important enough to keep secret for who knows how long. And now, 5 years after his death, this secret was somehow connected to my mysterious Tuesday visitor. I knew then that whatever was happening to me, whatever truth was about to surface, would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. The address on Jared's hidden note led me to a place I never expected to find myself. Willowbrook Care Facility, a residential institution about 40 minutes outside the city. I sat in my car in the parking lot for nearly an hour, staring at the modest brick building with its manicured gardens and cheerful yellow awnings. The paper in my hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I had called the phone number first, my voice barely steady as I asked to speak with whoever was in charge. The woman who answered, Mrs. Henderson, had a kind voice that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Collins," she had said after I introduced myself, "we've been wondering when you might call. Your husband visited regularly for so many years. We were all so sorry to hear about his passing." Jared had been visiting this place regularly, for years, and I had never known. "I'm afraid I don't understand," I had stammered into the phone. "What kind of facility is Willowbrook?" "We're a residential care home for adults with developmental disabilities," Mrs. Henderson explained gently. "Your husband never told you about Marcus?" Marcus. The name hit me like lightning, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Marcus. A name that had been forbidden in our house for over 15 years. A name that brought such pain to Jared's face that I had learned never to speak it aloud. "Mrs. Collins, are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I'm here. Can I come see him?" And now here I was, walking through the front doors of Willowbrook on shaking legs, following Mrs. Henderson down a hallway lined with cheerful artwork and family photos. The smell was institutional but clean, with hints of lavender and fresh bread from what I assumed was a kitchen nearby. "Marcus has been asking about you," Mrs. Henderson said as we walked. "He's been quite upset since his Tuesday visit stopped. He doesn't understand why he can't see his mother anymore." His mother. The word stopped me cold in the middle of the hallway. "I'm sorry, I think there's been some confusion. I'm not Marcus's mother." Mrs. Henderson turned to face me, her expression puzzled. "But you're Deanna Collins, aren't you? Marcus Collins' mother?" The world tilted sideways. Marcus Collins. He had Jared's last name. He had my last name. But I'd never given birth to a son named Marcus. I would remember giving birth. I would remember having a child. "There's been a mistake," I said, my voice hollow. "I don't have a son named Marcus." Mrs. Henderson's face grew concerned. "Mrs. Collins, perhaps we should sit down. I think there are some things you need to know." She led me to a small office and gently closed the door. From a filing cabinet, she pulled out a thick folder marked Collins Marcus and set it on the desk between us. "Marcus has been a resident here for 16 years, she began carefully. "He was admitted when he was 32 years old. According to our records, he has moderate intellectual disabilities, likely from complications during birth. Your husband Jared brought him here and has been responsible for all his care." I stared at the folder, afraid to touch it. "That's impossible. I would know if I had a son." Mrs. Henderson opened the folder and turned it toward me. The first page was an admission form dated 16 years ago. Under guardian, Jared's signature was clear and bold. Under emergency contact, my name was listed, along with our home address and phone number, but it was the photograph attached to the form that made my world collapse entirely. The man in the picture was unmistakably my child. He had my eyes, my chin, the same cowlick in his dark hair that I had had as a child, but his face showed the gentle, innocent expression I recognized in some people with developmental disabilities. He was smiling at the camera with pure joy, holding what looked like a stuffed animal. "This isn't possible," I whispered, but even as I said it, fragments began floating to the surface of my memory like pieces of a shipwreck rising from deep water. A difficult pregnancy. Complications during delivery. A baby who cried differently than other babies. Jared's increasingly worried expressions during those first months. The fights we had about getting help for our son. And then nothing. A blank space in my memory where my firstborn child should have been. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, my voice cracking, "how long did my husband say Marcus had been here?" She consulted the file again. "According to this, Marcus lived at home with you until he was 32. Then he was admitted here due to increasing care needs and behavioral challenges." But that couldn't be right. 16 years ago, I was 47 years old. I would have remembered having a 32-year-old son. I would have remembered him living in our house, eating at our table, being part of our daily life. Unless, "Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What did my husband tell you about me?" She looked uncomfortable. "He said you had been in an accident several years before Marcus was admitted, a head injury that affected your memory. He said you didn't remember Marcus anymore, and that seeing him caused you distress, so it was better if he handled all the visits alone." The room spun around me. A head injury, memory loss. It was a lie, but a carefully constructed one that would explain why I never came to visit, why I never called, why I seemed to have no knowledge of my own son's existence. "Can I see him?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Mrs. Henderson nodded. "He's in the activity room. But, Mrs. Collins, I should prepare you. Marcus has been very confused since your husband's death. He keeps asking why his mother doesn't come to see him anymore. He doesn't understand that Mr. Collins told us you couldn't remember him." We walked down another hallway, and I could hear laughter and music coming from a large, bright room ahead. Mrs. Henderson paused at the doorway. "He's over there," she said softly, pointing to a corner where several residents were working on what looked like a puzzle. And there he was. My son. The man who had been coming to my apartment every Tuesday, taking care of me the way I should have been taking care of him all these years. He was taller than I had expected, with gentle hands that moved carefully over the puzzle pieces. When he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, his entire face lit up with a joy so pure it nearly brought me to my knees. "Mama," he said, dropping the puzzle piece and standing up quickly. "Mama, you came to see me." Every person in that room turned to look at us as Marcus walked toward me with his arms outstretched. And in that moment, 16 years of suppressed memories came flooding back like a dam bursting. I remembered his birth, difficult and traumatic. I remembered the doctors telling us he would need special care. I remembered Jared's shame, his insistence that we couldn't handle a defective child, his gradual campaign to convince me that Marcus would be better off somewhere else. I remembered the day Jared told me Marcus had died in his sleep. I remembered the fake funeral, the empty casket, the grief that nearly destroyed me. I remembered how Jared held me while I cried for the son I thought I had lost, never knowing that my child was alive and waiting for his mother to save him. "Mama," Marcus said again, now close enough to touch, "I missed you so much. Why didn't you come see me anymore?" I opened my arms and pulled my son against my chest, feeling his solid warmth, breathing in the scent of his hair. Tears streamed down my face as I realized what Jared had stolen from both of us. "I'm here now, sweetheart," I whispered against his hair. "Mama's here now, and I'm never leaving you again." The drive home from Willowbrook felt like traveling through a dream. Marcus sat beside me in the passenger seat, his hands carefully folded in his lap, occasionally reaching out to touch my arm as if to make sure I was real. Mrs. Henderson had agreed to let him come home with me for the day, though she'd made it clear we would need to have longer conversations about his permanent care arrangements. "Mama," Marcus said as we pulled into my apartment building's parking lot, "is this where you live now? It's different from our old house." Our old house. I tried to remember selling the house where Jared and I had lived for most of our marriage, but those memories felt hazy, distant. Had Marcus lived there with us? How much of my own life had I forgotten or been convinced to forget? Yes, sweetheart, this is where I live now, I said, helping him out of the car. Would you like to see it? His face lit up. Can I see your bedroom and the kitchen? I like kitchens. As we rode the elevator to the fourth floor, I found myself seeing my building through Marcus's eyes. He'd noticed everything, the pattern in the carpeting, the way the elevator buttons lit up, the small mirror in the corner. His joy in these simple observations made my heart ache for all the moments we had missed together. Fred was in the hallway when we emerged from the elevator, changing a light bulb near Mrs. Peterson's door. When he saw us together, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, recognition, and then understanding. Mrs. Collins, he said carefully, this is the gentleman I was telling you about. Marcus waved enthusiastically. Hi, Mr. Fred. I remember you. You always say hello when I come to see Mama. Fred's eyes met mine over Marcus's head, and I could see the questions there. Later, I would have to explain everything to this kind man who had been the only one to notice what everyone else had missed. But for now, I just nodded. Thank you, Fred, I said, for everything. Inside my apartment, Marcus moved with the familiarity of someone who had been there many times. He went straight to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, checking the contents with satisfaction. Your milk was getting old, he said matter-of-factly. I got you the kind you like, with the blue label, and I brought you more of that tea that helps you sleep better. I watched him move around my kitchen with practiced ease, and pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Marcus hadn't been visiting me randomly on Tuesdays. He had been taking care of me, making sure I had what I needed, watching over me the way I should have been watching over him. Marcus, I said gently, sitting down at my small kitchen table, how long have you been coming here? He thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Since Daddy died. Daddy used to bring me here sometimes when you were sleeping. He said you got very sad after you hurt your head, and seeing me made you more sad, so it was better if I just helped take care of you without waking you up. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. Jared had convinced Marcus that his own mother couldn't bear to see him, while simultaneously convincing me that my son was dead. And Marcus, with his trusting heart, had accepted this explanation and found a way to love and care for me anyway. But how do you get here on your own? I asked. Willowbrook is very far away. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad filled with careful handwriting. Daddy taught me how to take the bus. He wrote down all the steps. See? He showed me pages of detailed instructions: which bus to take, where to get off, how to walk to my building, what to do if I wasn't home. And the key? Daddy gave it to me before he died. He said it was very important that I keep taking care of you, even if he couldn't anymore. He said you needed me, even if you didn't remember needing me. I stared at my son, this gentle soul who had been traveling across the city every week for 5 years to care for the mother who had been told he was dead. The enormity of what Jared had done to both of us was beginning to sink in. Marcus, honey, do you remember living at home with me before you went to Willowbrook? His face grew clouded, sad. A little bit. I remember you used to read me stories, and you made the best pancakes. But then you started crying a lot, and Daddy said I was making you sick because I was too much trouble. He said I needed to go live somewhere where people knew how to take care of someone like me. Someone like me. The phrase made my blood boil. Marcus wasn't someone like anything. He was my son, and whatever challenges he faced, they should have been faced together as a family. Sweetheart, you never made me sick. You were never too much trouble. I loved you then, and I love you now. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Really? Even though I'm different? Even though I can't do things the way other people do them? I reached across the table and took his hands in mine. Especially because you're different. You're perfect exactly the way you are. We spent the rest of the afternoon together, and I began to see glimpses of the child he had been. He was gentle and observant, with a quick sense of humor and an infectious laugh. He remembered details about things that interested him with startling clarity, and his emotional intelligence was remarkable. This was not a person who needed to be hidden away in shame. As evening approached, I knew I had to take him back to Willowbrook, but I also knew I couldn't leave things as they were. "Marcus," I said as we prepared to leave, "how would you feel about coming to live here with me? Not just for visits, but really living here." His face transformed with hope and disbelief. "You mean really? Like a real family?" "We are a real family, sweetheart. We always were." The drive back to Willowbrook was harder than I had anticipated. Marcus was quiet, and I could sense his fear that this might be another false hope, another disappointment. "Mrs. Collins," Mrs. Henderson said when we arrived, "how did the visit go?" "It went well. Better than well. I want to discuss bringing Marcus home permanently." She nodded thoughtfully. "I had a feeling this might come up. There are procedures we'll need to follow, paperwork to complete. Marcus has been here for 16 years, and his care needs have been stable, but there will be evaluations, home visits, support services to arrange." "I don't care how complicated it is," I said firmly. "He's my son, and he belongs with me." After Marcus went to his room, reluctantly, but with promises that I would be back soon, Mrs. Henderson and I sat in her office again. "Mrs. Collins, can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "Your husband told us some very specific things about your condition, about why you couldn't be involved in Marcus's care. But talking to you today and seeing you with Marcus, I have to wonder if we were given accurate information." I took a deep breath. "Mrs. Henderson, I never had a head injury. I never lost my memory. Until today, I believed my son was dead. My husband told me Marcus died as an infant, and I've been grieving him for over 30 years. Her face went pale. "Are you telling me that Mr. Collins lied to us? That he kept you from your son deliberately?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing the implications. "Mrs. Collins, what your husband did. If what you're saying is true, this isn't just deception. This is a form of kidnapping. He took your child away from you and convinced both of you that it was necessary." I nodded, feeling tears sting my eyes again. The question now is, how do we fix it? How do we give Marcus back the life that was stolen from him? Mrs. Henderson leaned forward. "Well, the first step is getting you approved as his legal guardian. Since your husband is deceased and you're his biological mother, it shouldn't be too complicated legally. The bigger challenge will be making sure Marcus has the support he needs to transition successfully." "What kind of support?" "He'll need time to adjust. He's lived in a structured environment for 16 years. There are also his medical needs, regular checkups, medication management, occupational therapy, and he'll need social activities, ways to stay engaged with his community." I listened carefully, taking mental notes. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. "There's something else you should know," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Marcus has mentioned other family members over the years. A sister, I think. Rachel. He's always wondered why she'd never visited." Rachel. My daughter, who had dismissed my concerns about the Tuesday visitor, who had suggested I might be having memory problems. Rachel, who had apparently never known she had a brother. "Mrs. Henderson," I said slowly, "how much did my husband pay for Marcus's care here?" She consulted the file. "The monthly fee is currently $3,800. It's been paid automatically from a trust fund that your husband set up. Nearly $4,000 a month for 16 years. The numbers made my head spin. Where had that money come from? How had Jared hidden such a massive ongoing expense? As I drove home alone that night, my mind raced with all the conversations I would need to have, all the lies I would need to unravel. But there was one conversation I dreaded more than all the others. I would have to tell Rachel that her brother was alive. I called Rachel the next morning, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth over the phone. Some revelations were too enormous for a simple phone conversation. Instead, I asked her to come to dinner on Sunday, along with her husband Tom and their 2 teenage children. "Is everything okay, Mom?" she asked, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "You sound different." "Everything is fine," I lied. "I just miss spending time with family." What I didn't tell her was that I had spent the entire week at Willowbrook, learning about my son and beginning the legal process to bring him home. Mrs. Henderson had been incredibly helpful, connecting me with social workers and disability advocates who could guide me through the transition. But more importantly, I had been getting to know Marcus again, or perhaps for the first time. He was remarkable. Yes, he had intellectual disabilities that affected his learning and processing speed, but he was also kind, funny, and surprisingly insightful about people and relationships. He remembered things with startling clarity, not just facts, but emotions, conversations, the way people made him feel. Daddy was sad a lot, he told me during one of our conversations, especially when he talked about you. He said you were too fragile to know about me, but I think he was the one who was fragile. I think seeing me made him remember that he did something wrong. My son understood more about his father's motivations than Jared had ever given him credit for. I had also made another discovery that made Jared's betrayal even more devastating. While going through old financial records, I found evidence of the trust fund that had been paying for Marcus's care. The money hadn't come from Jared's savings or his pension. It had come from the life insurance policy my parents had left me when they died. Money that was supposed to be mine. Money I could have used to care for Marcus myself if I'd known he was alive. Jared had stolen my son and then used my own inheritance to pay for hiding him from me. Sunday evening arrived gray and drizzly. Rachel came with her family as planned, and I tried to act normal as we sat around my small dining table eating the roast chicken I had prepared. But my nerves were frayed, and I kept glancing at the clock, knowing that at 8 o'clock Marcus would arrive for what I had told him would be a very important family meeting. "Mom, you seem really nervous tonight," Rachel observed as she helped me clear the dinner plates. "Are you sure everything's okay?" "Actually, there's something I need to tell all of you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Something very important about our family." Tom and the kids looked up from their conversation, sensing the gravity in my tone. Rachel froze with a serving dish halfway to the kitchen. "What kind of something?" she asked carefully. Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. My heart jumped into my throat. Marcus was exactly on time, just as he always was. "I need to get that," I said, standing up on shaking legs. "But first, I need you all to promise me that you'll listen to what I have to say with open hearts." Rachel's brow furrowed. "Mom, you're scaring me." I opened the door, and Marcus stood there, with a small bouquet of flowers, daisies he had picked from the garden at Willowbrook. He was wearing his best shirt and had combed his hair carefully for this meeting. "Hi, Mama," he said softly, then looked past me to the family seated around the table. "Are these the people you told me about?" I took his hand and led him into the living room. Behind me, I heard Rachel's sharp intake of breath, then silence so complete I could hear the ticking of my kitchen clock. "Rachel," I said, turning to face my daughter, "I'd like you to meet your brother. Marcus, this is your sister Rachel." Rachel stared at Marcus, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition. Marcus smiled at her with genuine warmth. "Hi, Rachel," he said. "Mama told me about you. She said you have kids. Are those my niece and nephew?" Rachel's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "I don't understand. Mom, what is this? Who is this man?" "This is Marcus," I said, guiding him to sit beside me on the couch. "Your older brother? My son." "That's impossible," Rachel said, her voice rising. "I don't have a brother. You don't have another son." Tom leaned forward, studying Marcus's face with growing recognition. "Rachel," he said slowly, "look at him. Really look at him." And she did. I watched as my daughter's eyes took in Marcus's features, features that clearly marked him as family. The same dark hair, the same green eyes she had inherited from me, the same stubborn chin that ran through our family line. "But you would have told me," Rachel whispered. "If I had a brother, you would have told me." "I thought he was dead," I said simply. "Your father told me Marcus died when he was a baby. I've been grieving him for over 30 years. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. "This is us," he said, handing it to Rachel. "Mama and me and Daddy when I was little, before I had to go live at Willowbrook." Rachel took the photo with trembling hands. It showed the three of us, Jared, myself, and a young boy who was unmistakably Marcus. I was smiling in the picture, my arms wrapped around my son, looking every inch the loving mother. I had no memory of this photo being taken. "I don't understand," Rachel said again, but her voice was smaller now, less certain. "Your father told me that Marcus had died as an infant," I explained. "He even held a funeral. But Marcus wasn't dead. He was living at a care facility for people with developmental disabilities. Your father has been paying for his care and visiting him regularly for 16 years, but he told the staff that I had suffered a head injury and couldn't remember Marcus, so it was better if I didn't visit." Rachel's face went through a series of emotions: shock, confusion, and then anger. "Are you telling me that Dad lied to all of us? That he kept my brother away from us?" Marcus spoke up, his voice gentle but clear. "Daddy was ashamed of me because I'm different. He thought people would think less of the family if they knew about me. But he loved me too, in his way. He just loved his reputation more." The simple truth of Marcos's words hit the room like a physical blow. Rachel started crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. "All these years," she gasped between tears, "all these years I thought I was an only child. I used to wish I had a big brother, someone to protect me and play with me." "And he was there the whole time?" Marcus stood up and walked over to Rachel, moving slowly so as not to startle her. "I wished I had a little sister, too," he said. "Daddy showed me pictures of you sometimes. I always hoped maybe someday I could meet you." Rachel looked up at him through her tears. "Why didn't you try to find me yourself?" "I did," Marcus said matter-of-factly. "After Daddy died, I tried to call you, but the lady who answered the phone said there was no Rachel Collins at that number, and she hung up on me. I didn't know you had a different last name now." Rachel covered her face with her hands. "Oh, God. That was probably me. I get calls from solicitors sometimes, and if I don't recognize the number..." She looked up at Marcus with horror. "I hung up on my own brother." Tom, who had been silent through most of this exchange, finally spoke. "This explains so much," he said quietly. "Rachel, remember how your dad always seemed uncomfortable around my cousin Jimmy? The one with Down syndrome? I always thought it was strange how he'd find excuses to leave whenever Jimmy was around." Rachel nodded slowly. "And he never wanted to donate to Special Olympics or any disability charities. He always said those organizations were wasteful, but maybe he was afraid of being reminded of the son he'd hidden away," I finished. My grandson Kevin, who was 16 and had been listening with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. "So I have an uncle? Like a real uncle?" Marcus beamed at him. "I'm your Uncle Marcus, and I know all about you. Mama told me you play basketball and that you're really good at math." Kevin grinned back. "That's so cool. Can you teach me some stuff? Like, what's it like living at that place?" "Kevin," Rachel said sharply, but Marcus held up his hand. "It's okay," he said. "I like questions. Willowbrook is nice, but it's not home. Home is where your family is." Rachel stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. When she turned back, her face was set with determination. "Mom," she said, "what do you need? What can we do to help?" The question I had been hoping for, but hadn't dared to expect. "I'm bringing Marcus home," I said. "I'm going through the legal process to become his guardian, and he's going to come live with me. Do you need help with the paperwork? Money for lawyers? What about making the apartment accessible?" I felt tears of relief spring to my eyes. I might need all of those things. But mostly, I need Marcus to know that he has a family who loves him and wants him here. Rachel walked over to Marcus and took his hands in hers. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry Dad kept us apart, and I'm sorry I hung up on you, and I'm sorry I didn't know you existed until tonight, but I want you to know that you're my brother, and I love you, and I want to be part of your life if you'll let me." Marcus's smile was radiant. I'd like that very much. Can I meet your kids? Really meet them, I mean. Of course, Rachel said, laughing through her tears. They're your niece and nephew, your family. As I watched my children embrace for the first time in their adult lives, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: complete peace. Jared's web of lies was finally unraveling, but instead of destroying us, the truth was bringing us together. Marcus was coming home, and we were going to be a real family at last. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen making pancakes while Marcus sat at the table, carefully reading aloud from the morning newspaper. It was our Sunday routine now: pancakes, newspaper, and then a visit from Rachel and her family. Simple pleasures that had been stolen from us for so many years. Mama, Marcus said, looking up from the sports section, it says here that the basketball team won their game. Kevin will be happy about that. Marcus had become devoted to following his nephew's interests, tracking the high school basketball scores, and asking detailed questions about Kevin's games. The relationship between uncle and nephew had blossomed in ways that brought joy to everyone in the family. The legal process to bring Marcus home had taken 2 months of paperwork, evaluations, and home visits, but it had been worth every moment of bureaucratic frustration. Marcus now lived with me permanently, with support services in place to help him maintain his independence and continue developing his life skills. He had his own room, decorated with his collections of model cars and books about trains. He had a part-time job at the local library, shelving books and helping with simple computer tasks. Most importantly, he had his family back. But perhaps the most significant change had been in me. For 30 years, I had carried the grief of believing my child was dead. The weight of that loss had shaped every aspect of my life, making me smaller, more cautious, afraid to love too deeply because I knew how much it could hurt to lose someone. Now, with Marcus home and thriving, I felt like I was waking up from a long, sorrowful dream. The pancakes smell really good, Marcus said, sniffing appreciatively, just like I remembered. You have a good memory, sweetheart. I remember lots of things, he said seriously. I remember when you used to sing to me at bedtime. And I remember the day Daddy took me away. You cried so much that day. I paused in my cooking, spatula hovering over the griddle. Marcus and I had been gradually piecing together our shared past, and each recovered memory was both precious and painful. Do you remember what happened that day? Why Daddy said you had to leave? Marcus nodded slowly. There was a lady who came to the house. She had a briefcase and a serious face. She talked to Daddy for a long time while I played in my room. After she left, Daddy packed my clothes and said I had to go live somewhere else because you couldn't take care of me anymore. A social worker. Someone had reported concerns about Marcus's care, and instead of seeking help or support, Jared had chosen to hide the problem by hiding his son. But I could take care of you, I said, flipping the pancakes with perhaps more force than necessary. I should have been allowed to take care of you. I know, Mama, and now you do. The doorbell rang and Marcus jumped up excitedly. That's Rachel and the family. Indeed it was. Rachel had become a constant presence in our lives, making up for lost time with an enthusiasm that sometimes overwhelmed Marcus, but never failed to delight him. She brought her children over every Sunday, and they had quickly learned to treasure their uncle's gentle wisdom and unexpected humor. Uncle Marcus, my granddaughter Emma called out as she burst through the door. I got an A on my science project, the one you helped me with. Marcus beamed with pride. He had become deeply invested in his niece and nephew's schoolwork, offering patient assistance with homework and celebrating every achievement as if it were his own. That's wonderful, Emma. What was your project about again? Ecosystems, she said, settling beside him at the table. You were right about how all the parts work together, just like families. Rachel caught my eye and smiled. Marcus had a way of finding simple truths that the rest of us missed. Over pancakes, we talked about the week ahead. Marcus had a doctor's appointment on Tuesday, the same day he used to make his secret visits to my apartment. Now Tuesdays were just another day, no longer shadowed by mystery and deception. Mom, Rachel said as we cleaned up after breakfast, I've been thinking about something. What's that? I want to know more about what Dad did. I mean, really understand it. Not just the fact that he hid Marcus, but how he managed to do it for so long without anyone noticing. I had been wondering the same thing. How do you erase a child from a family's history so completely that even his own sister doesn't remember him? I think he was very methodical about it, I said. He moved us to a new house when Marcus was young, so the neighbors didn't know we had a son. He discouraged me from making close friends. He handled all our finances so I wouldn't see the payments to Willowbrook, and he gradually convinced me that my grief over losing Marcus was unhealthy, that I needed to focus on moving forward. But the funeral, Rachel said. You said there was a funeral? A closed casket service with just the immediate family. Your father said he wanted to keep it private because the loss was too painful. I never questioned it because I was drowning in grief. Marcus looked up from where he was playing a board game with Kevin. Daddy was scared, he said matter-of-factly. He was scared that people would think less of him if they knew he had a son like me, but mostly he was scared that Mama would choose me over him. The insight was startling in its clarity. Marcus was right. Jared's actions hadn't just been about shame or embarrassment. They had been about control, about ensuring that he remained the center of my world, without competitions from a child who would need extra care and attention. He didn't trust me to love you both, I said, feeling a familiar stab of anger at my deceased husband. But you would have, Marcus said with absolute certainty. You did love us both. That's why he had to lie. Later that afternoon, after Rachel and her family had gone home, Marcus and I sat on my small balcony watching the sunset. He was reading one of his train books, occasionally sharing interesting facts about locomotives and railway history. Marcus, I said during a quiet moment, are you happy here? Really happy? He looked up from his book, his expression serious. Mama, I was happy at Willowbrook because the people were nice and it was safe. But this is different. This is home. What makes it feel like home? You, he said simply, and Rachel and the kids, and knowing that I don't have to hide anymore. At Willowbrook, I was Marcus who needed special care. Here, I'm just Marcus who belongs to a family. That evening, as I helped Marcus organize his medications for the week, a routine we had developed together, I found myself thinking about the woman I had been 3 months ago. Lonely, isolated, convinced that I had failed as a mother because my daughter seemed distant and my son was dead. Now I understood that my perceived failures had actually been victories obscured by someone else's lies. I had been a good mother to Marcus, good enough that 30 years later he still loved me unconditionally and spent his freedom taking care of me. And Rachel's distance hadn't been about my inadequacies as a parent. It had been about growing up in a family built on secrets and silences. Mama, Marcus said as I tucked him into bed, do you ever miss Daddy? It was a question he asked sometimes, and I had learned to answer it honestly. I miss the man I thought he was, I said, but I don't miss the lies or the loneliness, and I don't miss wondering what was wrong with me, that I couldn't remember my own son. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I think Daddy loved us, but he loved the wrong things more. He loved what people thought about him more than he loved what was true. My son's wisdom never ceased to amaze me. As I turned off his light and headed to my own room, I reflected on how completely my world had transformed. The mystery of the Tuesday visitor had led me to a truth more devastating and more healing than anything I could have imagined. I had my son back. I had rebuilt my relationship with my daughter. I had discovered that I was stronger and more capable than I had ever believed possible. But perhaps most importantly, I had learned that some losses are illusions, created and maintained by people who benefit from our grief. And sometimes the courage to question those illusions can give us back everything we thought we had lost forever. Marcus was home. We were a family. And after 30 years of living with a lie, we were finally free to live with the truth. In my bedside drawer, I kept the note Marcus had left in my kitchen all those months ago. Hope you're feeling better. The chamomile tea should help with your sleep. Take care of yourself. Now I understood that he had been taking care of me long before I knew he existed. But more than that, he had been teaching me something profound about love, that it persists even when it's unrecognized, that it finds a way to nurture and protect even when it's denied and hidden. My son had never stopped being my son, even when I thought he was gone. And I had never stopped being his mother, even when I didn't remember how. Some bonds, it turns out, are stronger than deception. Some love is too deep to be erased by lies. And some Tuesday visitors are not mysterious strangers at all, but guardian angels we never knew we had. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.